With the news in the last month that the Seiko Alpinist, the SAR version of the Alpinist, which has been on the market since 2006, is being discontinued, I thought it would be a very fitting time to compare this much beloved, sort of cult classic Japanese sports watch with another watch that I've really enjoyed on this channel. No, not my mechanical Hamilton Khaki. This watch I've had for many years, but it's really a different watch, being hand winding. Let's take a look at another automatic watch offered from Hamilton. This is their 42mm auto, their main khaki field version with a combination of brushed and polished surfaces. How does it hold up compared to the Alpinist? Let's check it out. Let's talk about core use philosophies and provenance of both of these watches first. Now, they are three-handed automatic sports watches designed to be used in a variety of active settings, but still dressy and formal enough that you could use them in a business or a semi-formal setting where a watch strap is going to fit right in. Now, the Alpinist was designed originally way back in '61 as a mountaineering watch. The Hamilton Khaki has been in some form of existence or another since the Second World War as a military watch, a field watch. Now, either of these watches originally were intended to be used in an outdoorsy, active setting. So both of these watches are made with materials that are meant to withstand the elements, sapphire crystals, stainless steel cases, and both of them are made with movements that are meant to hold up to vibration and shock. This brings me to one of the face value main differences between a Hamilton Khaki and a Seiko Alpinist, namely that you get a display case back showing off the movement on the Hamilton, at least on this version of the Hamilton with the H10 movement or with an ETA 2824 movement. Whereas with the Alpinist, you get a complication that's much more unique, actually, and much more perhaps useless. This is an interior rotating bezel. This inner bezel is used for the purpose of mountaineering. It has a compass on it. Would you like to see a video where I show you how to use your bezel as a compass? Well, it's a tool that mountaineers, especially mountaineers in the old days, I guess, used to help get their orientation in a pinch. And it is quite interesting to get this on a sports watch. The Alpinist comes with Seiko's in-house 6R15 movement, a very reliable middle-range movement that has a 50-hour power reserve and beats at 3 Hz or 21,600 beats per hour. It also has a date aperture with a nice black date, big wide 6, very distinctive Seiko date aperture, and as you can see, this is just a very detail-intensive design. On a macro level, the Hamilton's dial doesn't have quite the visual interest that the Alpinist has, but it is very solidly printed and looks good. There are no problems, at least. Now, the movement of the Hamilton is definitely worth taking a closer look at. This is the Hamilton H10 movement. It's an ETA-based movement, the 607.111, which is used in the Powermatic 80. It's used in a variety of swatches, middle road lines, as kind of their new base movement. And this is an excellent movement as a base movement with an 80-hour power reserve. It's above the so-called magic line of 62 hours, so you can take the watch off on Friday and put it on Monday, and it's still going to be working. So the Hamilton maybe lacks some of the details that the Alpinist has on the dial, although it does have certain details executed well, such as these snail trails and a nice clean aperture. I prefer the aperture on smaller size Hamiltons. Here on the Alpinist, you can see it's a little bit more integrated with its placement on the dial. But the Alpinist does have some sort of peculiar things. Obviously, what we're watching now are these skeletonized Cathedral hands. Some people don't like the shape of these hands at all. I think they're unique. They're not my favorite hands, but they're certainly not bad. Alternatively, the Hamilton has needle sword hands. Very solid, very strong design, reflects light great, holds lume great, very clean and very classic. This is not a design that's going to look dated or weird at any point, and I think that's one of the keys to the longevity of the Khaki line, is that it just uses core, strong design elements. I also prefer the text on the Hamilton Khaki's dial in comparison to the Alpinist. It has 3 simple lines of text. It's very clean typographically. It's just very simple. And also the different textures of the dial, even though it is just a one-layer dial, there are no applied indices anywhere, do give the dial visual interest even at a macro level. And so I think that in a macro level way, the Alpinist probably is more complex and maybe more visually interesting, but the Hamilton doesn't fail at this level either, and I want to make that clear. Now, one thing that I love about all Swatch watches at every level is the construction and build quality is just so interestingly reliable. And just look at the stack of these three hands here. This is just a pretty little detail that you get from really having a perfect manufacturing process. And I've seen this on a bunch of Hamiltons. Great little detail here. Let's take a step back now. One thing that I like about this Hamilton is that it wears very flat, especially at 42 millimeters. By contrast, even though the Alpinist is 12 millimeters, it wears kind of thicker and taller. One thing that I liked about the Hamilton better was that it came with a strap that's actually usable. I had to switch the strap out on the Alpinist. On the crown size, well, they're actually practically speaking feeling about the same in the hand. It's really just a style difference. The one thing that the Alpinist does have above the Hamilton is that it's a threaded crown, and so it has a better water resistance of 200 meters. Now, let's talk about details some more. I would say that the Alpinist has slightly finer and slightly more complex finishing than the Hamilton. Surprisingly, though, the lugs on the Hamilton Khaki hold up pretty nicely, I think, up close on this brushed version. On the caseback, you get similar straight brushed finishing on the rotor that you can see through the display caseback. I think that looks good. It's pretty simple, but not bad. Now, the Alpinist had radial brushing that, for me, has just not held up very well with NATO straps. Checking these watches out on the wrist, they both work very well on my 7 1/4 inch wrist. I prefer to wear the Alpinist with its non-display caseback on a single piece shell Cordovan strap from Hodinkee. It's been really comfortable, and I think it brings out some of the rich colors of the Hamilton very nicely. I think that the 38.5 millimeter size coupled with the 12 millimeter height and the 20 millimeter lugs makes for a somewhat tall feeling watch. I'm not talking like die watch tall or anything like that, but for a sports watch, it does sit a little proud on the wrist. Nothing that ruins the experience by any means, but it just feels a little large for its 38.5 millimeter size. Meanwhile, on my flat wrist, this 42 millimeter Khaki feels flatter. Even though it's the exact same height, 12 millimeters, the longer lugs wrap around my wrist a little bit more. This is where maybe you would try on different size Khakis at a watch retailer and figure out if the 38 millimeter size or the 40 millimeter size or this 42 millimeter size works for you. I think in the end, the thing that will draw you to the Alpinist, though, are the details. The fact that there's just a little bit more going on the dial and in the case to make you have maybe a more distinct watch in your collection. The Hamilton is, however, very solid. I would say that if you're looking for a single watch, or if you're newer into the collecting, this is a watch that's going to keep its interest even though you might not have a wide variety of watches in your collection. In the end, they're both very solid, very nice watches. The build quality is excellent on both of these. I don't really have a lot of gripes either way, except for minor details like the Seiko strap was terrible when I first got it. I also don't care for the date aperture on the Hamilton on the 42 millimeter version. It just seems a little out of place. Those are minor details, though, in the big scheme of things. In the end, if you're a one-watch type of guy, I think the Hamilton is a better all-arounder. But if you're a collector, I think you'll appreciate the details of the Alpinist, and especially since it's getting discontinued, it's worth looking into. I'd like to invite you to become a patron of 555 Gear. Please check out the link down below and find out what I'm offering for my patrons. I think it's pretty interesting stuff. And I'd like to thank my first two patrons, Cedric and Ada Gear and Outdoors, and WPERIGO1, who both supported me after my first call to action video. I'll be continuing to do shoutouts for new patrons here on 555 Gear. Thanks a lot, guys. I really appreciate it. And for those of you who made it all the way to the end, here's the most random comment that I've gotten recently on my channel. Thanks a lot, random